Hey there, it's Ben Housel here, and here in this tutorial we're going to have a look at how we animate images in Final Cut Pro 10. Now in particular, if you're animating images for a slideshow or in any part of your video edit, you may be using the Ken Burns effect, or you may be using keyframes to animate the scale or rotation of your images. We're going to have a look at how we manage those edits, so how you speed up and slow down those Ken Burns and keyframe animations, and then also how we can control them in a couple of different ways. So if this is something you're interested in, then keep on watching. Also, make sure you hit the subscribe button and the notifications button if you're interested in getting notifications for any new videos for Final Cut Pro that I upload. So let's dive into these 5 tips for animating images in Final Cut Pro 10. So the first thing I'm going to do is set our window layout so that we're all looking at the same screen layout. So we're going to come to Window, Workspaces and Default, and just reset our screen layout to the default, and that just means that we're all seeing the same thing. Now I've loaded in a handful of images that we'll be using for this tutorial. You can do the same. So any images that you have that you've taken with your phone, that you've taken with your DSLR, you can work with in this exercise. Or if you don't have images to work with, then dive to the website Pexels, where you can download some free to use images. So let's dive into the first tip, and that is how to apply the Ken Burns effect. So the Ken Burns effect is a simple method for animating images, basically a zoom in, a zoom out, or a pan across the image. And we'll just grab this image of 2 paddleboards on the beach, and on our timeline we're going to zoom out of this. So we're going to use Command and minus to zoom out, or you can come to the menu across here on the right and use the zoom button to zoom in and out of your timeline. So once we have our clip on the timeline here, we can highlight it and then come to the crop tools at the bottom left of your viewer here. So basically when we drop down this menu, we have some different options. You may see the transform controls there by default for increasing the size of and moving a clip around, and then we have the crop options where we have these 3 different crop options. So the trim option will trim down your clip, so it's going to leave everything in the same place, but it's just going to allow you to trim the edges of your clip. The crop option will allow you to reframe it, and it will actually zoom into your clip. But it's the Ken Burns effect that we're going to be looking at today. And as you can see, we have these 2 rectangles that show up around our image. We have an end point and a start point. So the start point is zoomed in here, and then we're going to gradually zoom out as we play this. So we'll just hit done for the moment and we'll come back into the Ken Burns effect. But essentially that's how to apply the basic Ken Burns effect. And you can see we're zooming out slowly from that image. So in order to get back into edit the Ken Burns effect, we need to reselect the crop tool. So to do this, if you've got multiple clips on your timeline or just the one as I do here, is make sure that you have the clips that you want to modify selected, and then come back up to the crop tools. Now we don't need to reselect the Ken Burns effect here, we can just select the crop option, and that will bring up some options here. So we can see the end point is a wider shot than the start point. We can flip those round, so reverse this so it's a zoom in rather than a zoom out by clicking these little hooked arrows up at the top left. And now you can see our starting point is wide and our end point is zoomed in. So if we hit the preview button, we can see a preview of our Ken Burns effect. So we're slowly zooming into our clip. Once we're happy with our Ken Burns effect, again we can click done, and then we can jump in and edit the rest of our timeline. And also one important thing to be able to do as well, if you choose to, is to turn off the Ken Burns effect. So if we've applied a Ken Burns effect and we decide we don't want it, then we can come up to our inspector at the top right. And if you don't see your inspector, you can go to Window, Show in Workspace, and check the inspector, and that will bring up your inspector on the top right. And you can see here that we have, next to every single effect that we add, the option to reset it. So basically these little hooked arrows will allow us to reset the crop options, in this case the Ken Burns or the crop options, and when we click that little hooked arrow it actually takes off the Ken Burns effect and we go back to the regular trim crop options. So I'm going to undo that. We want the Ken Burns effect on this clip, and now we're going to dive into tip number 2, and that is how we speed up or slow down the Ken Burns effect. Now this is really simple. It's dependent on the duration of your clip and also the amount of zoom that you have in your Ken Burns effect. So to speed up on the 10-second long clip that we have here, we would reselect the crop tool, and basically we can now move this around and reframe it. So basically we can reposition the animation here, and because we're zooming in a bit further, when we play this back, it's going to play back faster. So we've got more distance to travel within that 10 seconds, so our clip is going to zoom in faster. If we want to speed it up even more, we can do that on the timeline, and basically all we do is shorten the clip. So if we come to the end of our clip and trim it down to half the length, so around 5 seconds, then when we play this back, it's going to zoom in the same amount, but in those 5 seconds. So that's how to speed up and also reframe your Ken Burns effect in a couple of easy steps. I have my clip selected here with the yellow bar on the right, but in order to actually get into the Ken Burns effect, I need to select the clip fully. So click right on it. And you can see here that we can flip these round as well. So we've got that option still, even once we've made all these adjustments to the Ken Burns effect. So we can move where our clip starts, where it ends, and what you'll notice here is that I'm still moving the end point here. In order to move the start point, I just need to click once in the middle, and that will highlight the start point. So there's a little bit of getting used to how we select those different elements by jumping between the end point and the start point by clicking in them first before we begin to kind of move things around. So if we press done here, we can play through, and we have this nice swift zoom of the Ken Burns effect. Now the third tip that we have here with the Ken Burns effect is how we actually change the way that the animation is happening. So when we play this through now, you can see that the animation is very linear, so we're moving at a very steady speed through that image. Now sometimes we might want to ease in or ease out our clip at the beginning and end of the animation. So if we hover over the Ken Burns effect and come to our crop tool here, this third tip allows us to basically right click anywhere in our Ken Burns effect, and we can choose whether we want to ease in and out. So now we'll see that as we begin, we get a little bit of acceleration at the beginning and then at the end of our animation. So we're accelerating and then decelerating at the beginning and end rather than that linear animation. So we play that a little bit faster so we can see it more clearly. Okay, so you can see it kind of speed up and slow down at the beginning and end of that animation. And we can also change the options just at the beginning or just at the end. So we start with an ease in only or an ease out only. So we can move at a linear rate at the beginning and end, or one or the other. And when we play this through, you'll see we're back to that linear animation. So one thing we can do when we're working with the Ken Burns effect is we can copy and paste attributes from one clip to another. So this is the last tip for this one. I'm just going to shorten this clip down. And basically what will happen is if we go to edit and copy and then select the next image and then go to edit and paste attributes, or shift command and V, we can paste on that crop effect or the Ken Burns effect onto our new clip. And you'll see now we have the zoom out of our first clip and then the same zoom out of our second clip. Now this is kind of dependent on the images being the same dimensions or the same size. If you choose some images and paste attributes and they're not exactly the same dimensions, you may get some strange things happening there, and I've noticed that. So one thing I'll often do is I'll copy and paste attributes from multiple clips on the timeline, and then if I flip this second one, so I'll just rotate the start and end around, then we'll get a zoom out in the first clip and then a zoom back in on the second clip. And we can obviously go in and modify where the beginning and end point of these clips is. So we can use that as a starting point for our Ken Burns animation and then copy and paste it onto multiple clips. So let's click done here, and now we'll move on to looking at some keyframe animation. So this next tip number 4, is all about keyframe animation. So we're going to actually select a couple of images from up here. So I'm going to hold down Command and select a couple of images here. And I'm deliberately selecting images that are the same dimensions. So I've got 4 images here, and I'll drag these down to the timeline. Now I don't want all of these images to be 10 seconds long. So while I've got them selected on the timeline, and if you don't have them selected, then just drag a marquee around them to select those images. We're going to change the duration of them all so they're around 3 seconds. So I'm going to hold down the Control key and tap D, And that is going to bring up my duration in the middle here, which is 40 seconds. So the sum of the duration for these 4 10-second long images. And now I can type in, let's say 3.15 or 3.15, and basically we're making each of these clips now 3 seconds and 15 frames long, and we'll hit enter. Now, one point to make here, and I'm just going to come back and redo that, is that if you do this and you have the position tool selected, I'm just going to do Control and D again and type in 3.15. When we hit enter, it's actually going to leave a gap between each of those images, which we don't want because we're not repositioning them when we're changing the duration. We're kind of holding the position there. So effectively we're turning off the magnetic timeline. So I'll undo that, come back to my selection tool and hold down Control and tap D and then 3.15 or 3.15, hit enter, and with the select tool in our toolbar selected here, we'll snap all those back, so basically ripple the timeline back to the beginning. So now I'm going to hold down the Shift key and tap Z, and that is going to zoom me to my timeline. So we'll animate this first image first, and what you'll notice around each of these images is that on the left and right we have letterboxing for each of those images. So basically these images aren't 16:9, they're a slightly square or 4:3 or 5:4 format, so a photographic format, and basically we want to zoom in on all of these images. Now before we add the keyframes, if we select all of these images, okay, and come up to scale, we can actually increase the scale of all of these images in one go. So you can see I've zoomed in on all of those images, and for some it's worked better than others. And let's zoom out of this guy. Oh, that's not too bad. So basically we can select multiple images and change the zoom level of all those images in one go. So let's come to this first image and we'll come back to the beginning of our image. So now we're going to have a look at how we add keyframes for the animation of our image. And there's really two ways to do this. So let's come back to the beginning of this first image, and this is where we're going to add our first keyframe. So in our viewer here now, to add a keyframe, we need to come to the motion properties. So if you have still the crop selected, you can come to the transform options, and this is where we can set the scale, the rotation visually in the viewer. So when we turn this on, it's highlighted blue, we click the keyframe button here, and that will add our first keyframe. So now with this clip selected in the timeline and also visible in the viewer up here, we can move it around, and you can see because it's a little bit bigger than the 1920 by 1080 that we have here, we've got a little bit of space to move it to the right and to the left, and we can kind of nudge this around a little bit. So I've actually moved ahead in time a little bit here, so I'm going to actually just delete this keyframe by clicking on the delete keyframe at playhead here, and we'll come back to the beginning and we'll check that we've got a keyframe added here, which we do. So now you can see we've got the space to kind of move this around, and also if we zoom out a little bit to say 25%, we'll be able to see the edge of our image so that we can actually increase the size of it so that we've got a bit more space to move it around. So because this is a digital image, it's going to be much bigger than the video resolution, so we can increase it by a reasonable amount and not lose any quality. So I'm going to increase it to this size, and then we'll come to the end of our clip here, and I'm going to come to the end. It will snap to the edit point, and then I'm going to use my left hand cursor to come back one frame, and it's here that I need to drag this now to the left, and you'll see that red line appearing where we're adding our animation between these 2 points. So now if we come back to the beginning, we can play this through and it will animate slowly to the right. Increasing the speed of your keyframe animations is slightly different to increasing the speed of your Ken Burns effect. We can't just shorten the length of our clip. We need to actually move the keyframe. So I'm going to right click here and come to show video animation. And now if we stretch this out a little bit, we'll see those keyframes and we can move them closer together. So now you can see that we've moved those two keyframes together a bit closer. The animation happens a bit more quickly. So we can move these keyframes to any point in our clip, so we can have things start stationary and then begin to animate, and it's not animating throughout like the Ken Burns effect does. So if we come back to the beginning here, we're going to stretch out these keyframes and we'll shorten this clip a little bit. We'll let it be around 4 or 5 seconds long and we'll move these keyframes back to the end. So the show video animation options is really useful. We can also rotate our clip in the viewer here as well. So you can see we've got a little circle that allows us to rotate that. And if we right click on these 2 points, so these are the 2 keyframe points, we can change them from smooth to linear. So you can see we can have a completely linear animation or we can have some smoothing in that animation. So in the next clip, we'll actually come in here and to the beginning and we'll add our first keyframe here too, and now we can begin to animate this. So we'll show our video animation here so we can kind of see what's happening. So we've added our keyframes at the beginning and I just hit the X on the top left of the other video animation tab to close it, and we can see our first keyframes here. And now if we come ahead in time, we can add a second set of keyframes. I'm just going to move this up here. So we've got an animation up, and then if we come ahead in time, I'm going to get this to animate out a little bit. So I'm going to decrease the size of it and just reposition it so we don't reveal that kind of black edge. So basically now we have this slow move up and then a slow zoom out. So we've got complete control over kind of where we're looking in our animation, and there's also the ability to speed up and slow things down based on the keyframes rather than on the length of the clip. So a lot more control than you get with the Ken Burns effect. So one last thing that we can do here as well is we can look at our keyframe points and the smoothing that we have here on these clips. So if I zoom in a little bit more on my clip, so I'm going to come to 100%, you'll see that with smoothing turned on this middle point, we actually have some handles attached to that, and that allows me to change the angle and the speed. So we'll just zoom in a little bit more so we can see those other handles that are there, and you can see we can drag this out as well. So sometimes it might be a little bit finicky to get those grabbed, but you can see how we're changing the flow of that animation in and out of that keyframe. So if we zoom out to fit, we can see that happening. So we're animating slowly and then around that curve in the middle and then zooming out. So we've got a nice level of control with those keyframes. There are some other nice neat tricks you can do with your keyframe animations as well. If we just shorten this off to the end, if I select this clip and go to edit and copy and then edit, and I'm going to shorten this one down even more and then go to edit and paste attributes, I can paste that animation onto this second clip, and this will stretch to fit, so it's actually shorten the distance between the keyframes so that it happens within that space of time. So you can see now I have that same animation happening but much more quickly on screen there. Let's close these two. So you can see we've got this quicker animation happening. We can also use keyframes for transitions as well. So I'm going to drag another clip onto the timeline here. We'll grab the clip of this pool and we're going to just zoom in a little bit, and we'll zoom in a little bit more on this one too. Just need to zoom out so we can see the edge. And basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to make this move to the left. So this is going to move to the left at the end of this clip, and then at the beginning of this clip I'm going to have this clip move in from the right, from the same direction. So basically the movement's going to be the same, so it's going to look like we're kind of swapping the clips. It's a little trick of the eye. So we'll start our keyframes here, and I'm going to zoom in on the timeline. So if I hit the keyframe option there, come ahead in time, back to the last frame by using the left hand cursor, and then drag this to the left, and then we'll come to this clip turn on our keyframing for this, and then we'll come ahead in time and we'll drag this one to the left as well. So now we've got kind of nice quick swap of those two images. And if we speed this up, so I'm going to show the video animation for both of these, then we'll get a kind of cleaner effect. So it will drag the eye and you'll get that kind of nice quick swap of the images. And we can also mix this with a zoom as well. So if we come in here and just have this zoom in a little bit as it does that, that change in scale will also kind of keep the eye busy. And you can see as I play through that now, if we play it at fit, then we get this nice quick kind of swap of the image. And you'll see that used a lot in different animations. So we'll just hit Shift and Z here. So we've got our 5 tips for working with video animations here. We've got Ken Burns effects for adding quick animations and zooms in and zooms in and zooms out. And then also keyframe animation for doing simple slide animations. And then also some more complex animations where we're actually beginning to work with the curves of the images in here as well using keyframes. And we haven't really run into too much rotation in here as well, but we can use that too. So for instance, if we come to this edit point here, then if I come to the last point here, I'll add a little bit of rotation. So this is going to quickly rotate there. And then what I'll do is I'm going to get this to bounce back the other way. So I'm going to get it to kind of flop back. So basically on this second clip, if I rotate this round to the same angle, and I just need to move it up a little bit so that we don't reveal the black there at the edge, and actually increase the scale just a touch too, we'll get this nice kind of flip of the angle. So you can see when we have that quick movement, it just keeps the eye nice and busy between those two keyframes. So we get a real nice animation there, and because everything's moving all the time, we're kind of moving the eye, we're keeping the eye busy on screen with that movement, and that's what's kind of creating this smoke and mirrors effect of it looking like a smooth, clean transition between one clip and the next. A couple of things we haven't covered yet, how to delete keyframes. If we right click on a keyframe, we can delete it. Also, if we're hovering over the keyframe with our tool, our transform tool turned on here, we can delete keyframes up in the viewer as well. And then we can also modify keyframes in lots of different ways across in our inspector too, which we haven't covered yet in this lesson. We've been focusing on working in the viewer with those tools. But if you want to get into kind of pixel perfect animations, then come up to the inspector and you'll be able to see how those work. Actually, one thing we can cover lastly is if we select these two keyframes here, I'm going to go to edit. We have an option in the edit menu to copy just keyframes. So if I copy those keyframes and come back to the beginning of this clip, I can go to edit keyframes, and I just need to select the transform options here and then edit keyframes and paste, and that will allow me to paste in those two keyframes at the beginning there too. You can see there's a little bit of modifying I need to do on that first one to make it work. But basically now we've got a little snap in there, and we'll just increase the scale here a little bit too, so that this is in a similar position to where we started. So we have that nice little snap, which will work even though the last image is kind of a little bit more static. And you can see how we've copied and pasted keyframes from the beginning of one clip to another. So you've got a real nice level of control over those different animation elements in Final Cut Pro 10. And I said, I hope this has been useful. If you have any questions about Final Cut Pro 10, then do drop me a message, and I look forward to seeing you on the next tutorial.